It was not that long ago that most of us lived our lives within a completely local radius. If you were alive 200 years ago, you'd have lived out your entire life within a 36-mile radius. You knew there was more, but you probably didn't know how much more there really was. And it didn't really matter anyway, you had a lot to take care of. You didn't have the time, you could not afford the time to contemplate that kind of stuff. You had to feed yourself. You had to survive. Our ancestors, some of our parents even, never had the privilege to choose, to make a decision. Back then, you knew what your life was going to look like from start to finish, and it applied everywhere. You didn't think about what you'd eat for dinner or where you'd go out. You had liver and onions all day, every day. You didn't think about what school to send your kid to, you were just happy it was there. You worked non-stop. You toiled. You didn't even have to think about your weekend, it didn't exist. Your wife? You bumped into her. There weren't that many people to bump into then. You didn't have a car, you couldn't afford a horse. You really did just bump into her. And when you did, you didn't give it much thought. It was just like, well, she's got a head and two arms and two legs and some hair on top, and right, that's the one. And that was it. That was your whole life. It was very basic, a very simple life. All of that is to say that we live in a pretty unique point in history. We have never, ever had to make so many choices. It's great. We've got so much to pick from. You don't have to be an 8th generation bricklayer. You can teach, you can do tourism, you can do therapy, you can become an engineer, you can do art and make a living at it. There are all sorts of odd jobs out there. And if you're not satisfied, you can switch. Careers. And if you're not satisfied with that, you can make your own job. And look to the consumer life. It never ends. The endless goods and services, the food you eat, the clothes you wear, the books you read, the knickknacks, the phones you buy, and your Starbucks latte, you can have that in 27 different flavors. Do you know Coca-Cola alone has over 3,500 different drinks? But it's also very difficult and daunting. Choosing can be daunting for the same reason, because you've got that much to pick from, and so your life can turn out in that many different ways. Barry Schwartz calls it the paradox of choice. Barry's a psychologist, and what he's observed is that fundamentally having a lot of choice is good, but that it can also be very damaging, especially psychologically. He focuses on consumer choice, that's his specialty, like picking one smartphone from 100 different other ones. But you can apply this to life as well. Choosing is stressful, it makes us anxious, and when it comes to the big stuff, like picking your degree, marrying, leaving a comfortable job for something that might be better, it can be downright painful. A lot of it is a slow kind of pain, looming like an unwanted mist. Always second guessing ourselves. Did I make the right decision? How do I pick? That kind of thing. He also thinks that, at its worst, the paradox of choice can affect our happiness in general, our chronic happiness. Here's an excerpt from his book. Open quotation. The American happiness quotient has been going gently but consistently downhill for more than a generation. While the American gross domestic product, a primary measure of prosperity, more than doubled in the last 30 years, the proportion of the population describing itself as very happy declined. The decline is about 5%. This might not seem like much, but 5% translates into about 14 million people. People who would have said a generation ago they were very happy would not say so today. The same pattern is present when respondents are asked more specific questions about how happy they are with their marriages, their jobs, their financial circumstances, and their places of residence. It seems that as American society grows wealthier and Americans become freer to pursue and do whatever they want, Americans get less and less happy. The most dramatic manifestation of this decrease in societal happiness is in the prevalence of clinical depression, at the opposite end of the happiness continuum. By some estimates, and this point is really interesting by the way, by some estimates, depression in the year 2000 was about 10 times as likely as depression in the year 1900. Close quotation. And it's going up. Clinical depression is on the rise. Now, depression is a complicated, multifaceted problem, and to imply that the agony we can derive from the paradox of choice can be the source of one's depression is probably overly simplistic. But I do think he's observed an interesting correlation nonetheless, and if I had to guess, as a person who is not qualified enough to talk about depression, I'd guess there is a link. So let's move away from that. Let's talk about why we suffer. Why do we suffer from the paradox of choice? 3 reasons, according to Barry. Number 1, opportunity cost. The loss of a potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. Would my life have turned out better if I picked A instead of B? Number 2, extreme opportunity cost, which he calls escalation of expectations. The incredible volume of choice available leaves us unsatisfied. My life turned out well, we think to ourselves. But if I had made that decision, my life could have turned out 100 times better. Number 3, self-blame. Excessive self-blame damages us. I am the reason my life turned out the way it did. I wasn't good enough. Right? We even blame ourselves when things go well, but not apparently well enough. I think the first 2 points are pretty clear. In a world where we can compare ourselves to superstar athletes, intellects, and so on, our opportunity cost can be a lot more damaging. It warrants some more discussion, and I guess I have a complicated opinion about comparing ourselves. It's helpful and it's not. It isn't necessarily the thief of joy as Elon Musk claims it is. We'll come back to that later, but what I want to focus on specifically is Barry's last point, self-blame. I think that part has the most potential for damage. When it comes to self-blame, we've got to be reasonable. We've got to think about it logically. There is almost always some level of blame that we can attribute to ourselves. We made a decision. We made that so-called mistake. But it may not have been entirely our fault. We've got to keep ourselves in check. Were you really not qualified enough for that job? Or did they already have someone pre-selected? Did you really deserve a C? Or does your essay deserve more merit? Be careful, but dare to know. You could be right about all those things. Dare to know. There's a lot we don't have control over. Control. That's an interesting idea. Let's talk about that. Barry says that a large part of our self-blame comes from an erroneous notion that we control our fate, that we are masters of our own destiny, and that the more choice we have available to make, the more control we should have over our life. Again, we do have some control, but there are too many variables at play. We don't have full control. Let's use body weight as an example of something people feel they're supposed to control. And that the perfect body in America is thin, at least that it is free of superficial fat. An excerpt from Barry's book. Open quotation. When efforts to be thin fail, people not only have to face the daily disappointment of looking in the mirror, they also must face the causal explanation that this failure to look perfect is their fault. Close quotation. We cannot control all of that. It's not our fault. Do you know there are essentially 3 different body types? Ectomorph, lean and long. Endomorph, bigger and fatter. Mesomorph, muscular and well-built. You can't change that. It's genetic. You were born that way. There is a large aspect of your physical body that you cannot change. And that if you want it to change, to the extent that it is possible for your body to change, that you would need to spend an exorbitant amount of time and energy on. In the gym, running every day, looking over every calorie and kind of food. That is where comparison becomes a thief of joy. There is no reasonable point in comparing here. So that's Barry's solution, actually, broadly speaking, to the paradox of choice. Lower your expectations. There's no point in comparing everything. Every aspect of your life does not need to be perfect. It is more than okay to have a lot of it be good enough. As Barry says, open quote, we shouldn't have to fixate so much about finding an education that is stimulating and useful, work that is exciting, socially valuable, and remunerative, spouses who are sexually, emotionally, and intellectually stimulating and also loyal and comforting. Our children don't have to be beautiful, smart, affectionate, obedient, and independent. And everything we buy doesn't have to be the best of its kind. Close quotation. We have to learn to let go. Not all the way, but let go. Letting go gives us so much more breathing room. We can think better. We won't be distracted by the gnawing idea that we didn't choose well. I should have gone to the gym today. I should have read a couple more pages. I should have had cereal for breakfast instead. I should have picked a math degree instead of an art degree. Let go. We can appreciate life more. We're happy with the choices we made. We're satisfied. The view is good enough. Just enjoy the moment. So yeah, I don't think Barry's saying you should stop dreaming. But after you've really thought about your decision, talked about it with your local wise men, done your research, make a decision and live by its consequences. Let go. The worst thing you can do is nothing. Analysis paralysis. You can spend your entire life analyzing, but it won't matter if you don't have a go. Make a decision and let go. Letting go of the persona. You know that social mask we wear in the public? Well, maybe it's time we learn to let that... Just kidding. We're not going to get into that. But Carl Jung and the persona. Some seriously cool stuff. Maybe next time. Okay. Bye.